What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Moonbuilt Garage, and welcome to part 3 of the custom dash build for the D100. Let's just jump right into this. So in the first video, when I started building the custom dash for the D100, I talked about the possibility of skinning this thing with sheet metal. That's not going to happen for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest reason is I just don't have the tools that I think I would need in order to make a lot of the shapes needed to cover that dash. I probably need like an English wheel, planishing hammer, stuff like that, tools I just don't have in order to achieve some of the complex shapes to cover that thing. Second, with this thing being a dash and the sun beating on it through the windshield, I'm not sure that sheet metal would be the smartest choice. And third, if I'm being totally honest, I don't have the skills that I think are needed to make that thing look the way that I want it. To achieve the look that I want, I'm just not skilled enough. Gotta be honest. So, I'm going with fiberglass. So to start the fiberglass process, I want to get a good covering over the dash that'll give me a good base. But I want the covering to achieve a lot of these curves, especially down in this area here where it curves down, and there's a lot of shaping on this entire dash. I want something that I can use to cover it and to help give a good base to lock that shape in. We're going with fleece. So with the fleece, I can pin it down, I can clamp it around, pull it tight, stretch it out, and really get my shape dialed in, get it nice and smooth. Rather than trying to work with glass right off the bat, the fleece will give me a good base to start with. Alright, so there you can see I've got the fleece base pretty much done. There's still some adjustments that need to be made. You can see, especially over by the glove box area, there are some low spots. And then over here, like on the edges, there's some wrinkles that still need to get worked out. But a lot of that will be handled after it's resined. It'll get sanded. Once there's some glass put on, that'll smooth out some of that stuff. And plus, I'm going to be probably using some flexible body filler to fill in any larger voids or any larger defects in this. So one thing I did have to do though is over on the glove box area. Let me show you that. So this area is going to be getting covered, and then I'm going to cut the glove box door out of the cover. So there are some bows, some metal or some TIG wire bows here that are holding that shape. In order to keep the fiberglass resin from sticking to those bows and make them removable later, I covered the area with some parchment paper. Like I said, all it's going to do is keep the resin from sticking to these bows, and then I'll be able to take those out later. Here you can, like you saw in the time lapse, I just pinned a lot of the tension in the fleece. So that's what's holding the shape. Now what I want to do is cut this area open for the gauge panel and then pull the fleece around and pin it to that flange that's in there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and watch the last video where I made the mounting area for the gauges. So that'll be the next step. Cut that open and pin the opening. It'll just help pull it around even tighter, and I won't have to worry about this area getting resined and then make it harder to cut out later. All right, so now that I got the dash pretty much completely covered and everything's pinned down pretty well, I'm gonna start mixing up some resin. I'm gonna do a coat of resin over the fleece. I'm gonna start with the areas like the front here and the bottom, all along the front, everything that kind of gives the dash the shape. With it being as warm as it is, this stuff's probably gonna set up pretty quick. So I'm gonna concentrate on those areas first, and then I'll mix up more resin as I need to. So let's get started with that. There you can see I've got the initial coat of resin pretty much done, and it's really done a lot to lock in the overall shape of the dash. At this point, I'm just about ready to start reinforcing this thing with some glass. But before I start with the glass, there is one detail that I need to work out. And that detail are my vents. So right now, the way that I have the dash laid out, those vents, one over there, are covered. Obviously that's not gonna work. So I have a plan of how I'm gonna deal with this, and it starts by cutting a couple of holes in my newly resined dash. All right, so here's what I've come up with for the vents. Hopefully this will show up okay. So the first thing I did was I cut a hole in the dash for the vent. I actually cut it about 1 inch larger than the vent itself. Then I wrapped the vent in parchment paper, and that'll keep any resin from sticking to it. Then I took a scrap piece of fleece, dropped it in the hole. Basically, I cut a hole in the bottom for the vent, and then I cut holes for the vent mounting studs to pin everything in place. So here you can see the fleece is pinned in place, and then now I can pull it tight, and I can get a good contoured shape all the way around. Try to make some room here, got too much fleece in the way. But now I've got a good contoured shape here for the vent. Now I can resin this in place and it'll hold its shape. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim a lot of this excess off. I'm gonna use some CA glue, crazy glue basically, to kind of pin this in place, and then I can resin it here in the truck just to lock in this shape and pin and lock this piece of fleece to the dash. Now, there's also a piece of parchment paper between, see if I can get a good view of it here. There you can just see it. Excuse my shaking, I'm trying to do this basically one-handed. All right, so there you can see the piece of parchment between the vent and the metal dash. And that, again, that's just to keep any resin that may seep through from getting it stuck to the metal dash and causing a problem. But once all this is done, what I'll be able to do then is I'll be able to trim this fleece right around the vent, right up against the vent. Because I don't want to use the vent well, I don't want the vent preventing me from pulling the dash out. I want to have it separate. So I'll be able to trim it nice and flush with the vent, and then I'll be able to just drop the dash in place right around the existing vent. Now I got to do the same thing to the vent over there. All right, so I'm going to try to give a good angle of this through the windshield. Hopefully this turns out okay. So I've got both vents cut out. This is the driver's side. So what I'm going to do now is I've already trimmed this fleece back a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it tight. I'm going to just CA glue it. I got some of this Bob Smith Industries CA glue. Really good stuff. And I got some activator to go along with it. So hopefully my plan is, we all know how plans go. I guess I'm just going to kind of pull this taut, tack it in place with a little bit of CA glue, and hopefully this will work out the way that I'm intending it to. So I'm just going to put a little, I want it right along the edge. I don't want, because I want to trim this as close as I can. I'm going to spray the fleece down with the activator. Just going to kind of saturate the area. And that way, once I pull this up and taut, that will hopefully activate the CA glue. There you go, it's tacked in place. Now I can trim this off closer, and then once I resin it, you know, it'll be good to go. So I'm going to finish doing that as much around this opening as I can, trying to get all the wrinkles out, trying to get it as smooth as I can. I'm going to have problems up here in the front just because it's so tight. I may have to wait until I get this part resined, and then I'll be able to take it out, secure the front side, and then resin that outside of the car. But I'm just going to continue with this now. Wanting that to create a nice smooth transition from the vent to the dash. I think it's turning out pretty well, pretty good. This should make, now once I resin it, I'll be able to trim it flush right along the edge of the vent, and that'll make the dash removable without having to remove the dash, or without having to remove the vent. Right now the vent has this fleece pinned down in there, so hopefully this will work as I kind of have planned. But like I said, we'll see how it all turns out. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move over to the passenger side, and then I'll resin it. Now that I have the base layer of resin done, I've got a really good structure for the dash, I'm ready to start glassing it. So I'm going to be using two different kinds of glass. I'm going to be using a chop mat, and I'm going to be using what's called boat cloth. So the chop mat is basically just as it sounds. It's made up of a bunch of individual strands of glass just kind of going every which direction. This, I don't know how well this is going to show up here because of the light, but you can kind of see that, how the glass just goes every which direction. This stuff is really good for structure because there's no like directionality to it. It just goes everywhere. So this is really good for strength. The boat cloth, on the other hand, this stuff, and this is a 4-ounce boat cloth. It's a really lightweight. It's got a really tight weave to it. I'm going to try to get a good, it almost feels like cloth or like canvas almost. It's just got a real tight weave to it. And this stuff, I've never used it before, supposedly wets out really well and dries and just stays really smooth, makes for a real nice surface. You probably use something like that if you've used fiberglass before in these fiberglass repair kits. This is something similar. It's just not as tight of a weave. So I may use some of that also, but I'm going to be using the boat cloth on the outside just to get a smooth finish on the outside. We'll see how that works. And I'm going to be using the chop mat on the inside. So that's what I'm going to be going for right now. And that's what I'm going to be working on right now is I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to do a layer of the chop mat on the inside just to really build up, to give this some real good rigidity. I mean, there are some real soft spots right now because it's just fleece and resin. I don't want to build up the outside anymore. I don't want the outside to get too much thicker. So I'm going to be using the boat cloth on the outside once I get some structure done to the inside with the chop mat. All right, so here's where I'm at right now, guys. I've been doing a lot of work kind of off camera, just, you know, resin, fiberglass, not too exciting to really show, just kind of stiffening the dash up, adding some structure. I did run into a couple of issues. First, you can see there's some body filler here. So the first issue I ran into was where I had that metal frame, the bows in the metal frame. When I stretched the fleece across it, it worked out great. But as soon as I resined it and the fleece got wet, it kind of dipped between the bows. So I had some low spots, like 4 different low spots along here. So what I ended up doing was I took some of the fiberglass chop mat and built those areas up a little bit, probably about 2 layers in each. And then I did a layer of Bondo body filler over that to smooth it out. I'm not worried about the Bondo becoming maybe too rigid or, you know, cracking at some point. There's going to be a layer of fiberglass over this, the boat cloth, which is the step I'm getting ready to do now. So I'm okay with using regular body filler. If I need to do any kind of smoothing once the boat cloth is done, then I'm going to use what I used for the vents. The vents, I did the same thing. I kind of laid some fiberglass in there. I ran it long and then I sanded it back, just kept trial fitting the dash in the truck. I'd put it in there, check the fit, realized that the vents or the cutouts were hitting the vents in the dash, so I'd sand it back, test fit it, sand it back and forth until I got it. But doing that with the fiberglass and the resin ended up being a little more difficult than what I really anticipated. So what I did, excuse me, what I did was I used some padded dash filler. It's basically a Bondo type, it's a 2-part like body filler, but it's meant for use on dashes and it stays a little flexible. So I felt that was probably a better material to use. So I used that and I built up, let me flip this over and I'll show you. You can see I built up the area with that padded dash filler, and what that did was it made it a lot easier to sand. So I built up the area, built it up long, and same thing. Just sanded it down flush, and now it sits right on the edge of those vent covers, and it's a nice fit. So I use that same padded dash filler when I fixed the original glove box and dash in the truck. So if I need to do any kind of smoothing once the final layer of glass is on here, then I'll use that. I'm not worried about this thing being, you know, super smooth as glass. It's a dash and it's going in that thing. So I don't want this to be perfectly smooth. Plus it's going to be getting a textured coating anyway. So I'm more concerned with it being rigid and sturdy, structurally sound, than I am about it being smooth. So that's what I'm getting ready to do now. I'm going to do the final layer of fiberglass. I'm going to be using that boat cloth. It's super fine, super smooth. I'm going to use that for the final coat. And I was going to do this and try to do it in like one big sheet, but I realized that would be kind of dumb, just because that would lead to a lot of possibility for creases and you know, ripples and stuff like that. So I'm going to probably do it at least in half. I'm going to be able to do this part in one piece, and then I'll do the other piece probably in two. Plus, trying to do it all in one shot, that'd be a lot of resin to mix. And in this heat, the resin has been setting up really fast. So you know, in order to maximize my work time, I'm going to do it in sections. So that's what I'm going to do now. Once that layer of boat cloth cured, which I gotta say that stuff cured so nice. It wet out really well, and when it dried and cured, that stuff was super smooth. Really like that. The only thing I didn't like about it was around the edge or at a corner, it didn't seat. It wouldn't stay down around the edge. I don't know if I just didn't put enough resin down before laying the boat cloth, or if just because it's so thin that it would just pull away. No big deal though. I trimmed that off, and then the next step took care of that. So once that cured, I sanded it with some 80 grit just to give it some good tooth, but I mean, it was super smooth. There were still some low spots and things like that, so I ended up using some Polyvance padded dash filler. I'll leave a link to it down below. I've used the stuff when I did the original gauge cluster enclosure and the glove box repairs for the D100. So once I use that, you can see all the gray on the panel. So all the gray here is that padded dash filler. And again, I just put it on real thin. It really filled in any voids. I did have a couple of air pockets, things like that. So I sanded those out, and then the padded dash filler filled those up really nice. This is actually pretty smooth, even though I did go over it again with some 80 grit, and that's for the next step. So the next step, this will be getting a texture coating with some of this SEM texture coating. It's made for like bumpers and dashes and things like that. I used that stuff also when I did the original gauge cluster and glove box repair for the D100. Same stuff. Looks really nice. I really like the texture it gives, the finish, so I'll be using that on this dash. But before I can give the dash its final coating, I get to cut a big hole in the dash. So when I built the frame and started covering this thing and doing all the fiberglass, I had pre-planned out the glove box. So the glove box door is going to be, it's a pretty large door because it's got to give access to the glove box and the fuse panel. And I wanted to do it this way so that since I did it all in one shot, I can just cut the door out and I know it'll fit. I know it'll match the shape perfectly with the dash. I don't have to try to, you know, build the dash with the glove box already cut out and then make a door to fit, to get the shape right, to get the size right and everything. I'll be able to just cut this out. That piece that I cut out will become the door. I'll do some more bracing to that, and I'll have to figure out how to mount a hinge and all that stuff. And I'll probably have to do some cleanup around the edges, probably with some more dash filler, just to give the edge a nice, clean, crisp corner. So let's get to cutting a big ass hole in my brand new dash. Once that spray texture kind of cured, everything dried enough that I could bring it inside, I realized I wasn't happy with it. There were just a lot more imperfections and a lot more flaws in the surface than what I was okay with. I'm okay with some. You know, like I say, I don't want this thing to be, or I don't expect it to be, perfectly glass smooth. I just thought that that spray texture would hide more of the flaws than what it did. So I just wasn't happy with it. So I've been spending some time sanding, using some more filler, trying to get rid of some of those. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I got to get this video edited. I'm going to be traveling for work this upcoming week, so yeah, I'm just out of time. But you know, that's kind of how things go. Not everything is going to turn out exactly as we hope the first time. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 tries to get things to where we want them, to where we're happy with them. So it is what it is. I appreciate you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you on the next one.